Okay, let's dive right in. If you're prepping for your teaching exam, you know the topic of Lexis can feel, well, huge and kind of overwhelming. But don't you worry, we're going to treat this explainer as your personal blueprint, a really clear, structured guide to help you build that perfect exam answer. We'll cover what you absolutely need to know, the key theorists you have to mention, and most importantly, how all that theory actually connects to a real classroom. We're starting with what might just be the single most important quote for this whole topic. This line from David Wilkins, "This is your cornerstone." I'm serious, using this to open your exam answer is a total power move. It immediately shows the examiner that you get the fundamental shift in language teaching. Away from that old grammar-first approach and toward recognizing the vocabulary is the very heart of meaning.
So, here's our roadmap. And hey, this also happens to be the ideal structure for your written answer. We'll start with the why, move through the core theories, build that bridge to actual teaching, and then wrap up with a summary of the absolute essentials. Let's get into it.
First up, your introduction. Your goal here is to show you understand why we're even talking so much about Lexis. For a long, long time, vocabulary was kind of the side dish to the main course of grammar. Your introduction has to make it crystal clear that this has all changed. Modern linguistics puts Lexis right at the center of the table. So, your opening paragraph needs to hit a few key points. You want to state that Lexis gives us the basic building blocks of meaning, and that lexical competence is a huge part of overall communicative competence. And here's a pro tip for getting top marks. You gotta name drop. You need to reference David Wilkins and his killer quote, and connect lexical competence to the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR. Examiners love seeing you make that connection.
All right, let's move on to the next section. The theory behind it all. So, what is Lexis, really? The simple answer is just the vocabulary of a language. But for a top-grade answer, you need to show you know it's so much richer than that. It's not just some long, boring list of individual words.
And when you're talking about the modern view of Lexis, there is one name you absolutely, positively have to mention: Michael Lewis. This is the guy, the architect of what we now call the lexical approach.
This right here is Lewis's big idea, and it's a total game changer: lexical chunks. His argument was that we don't really communicate by stringing together single words like beads on a necklace. Nope. Instead, we use these prefabricated chunks of language. Think about phrases like "by the way" or "nice to meet you," or word pairings like "heavy rain." For your exam, the connection is simple. Just lock this in your brain. Michael Lewis equals lexical chunks.
Okay, next up. This is where you demonstrate a deeper level of knowledge. A really great answer will touch on the mechanics of how a language actually creates new vocabulary. It shows you get that Lexis is alive, it's dynamic, it's constantly evolving. So let's just quickly cover the main ways this happens.
First, you've got derivation. This is probably the most common one you'll see. It's simply about adding bits to the beginning or the end of a word, prefixes or suffixes, to change its meaning or its word class. The classic example? Turning the adjective happy into the noun happiness just by adding ness. Easy.
Then there's compounding, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You're just smashing two existing words together to make a new one. Think black and board becoming blackboard, or class and room becoming classroom. It's simple, but it's a super powerful way to make new words.
And this one is really common in English conversion. This is where a word changes its job without changing its clothes. The noun email magically becomes the verb to email with nothing added on. It just shows how flexible and, productive the English lexicon really is.
And one last point to really elevate your theory section is to just briefly touch on lexical relationships. What this tells the examiner is that you get that words don't just exist in a vacuum. They live in this huge interconnected network of meaning. Just mentioning concepts like synonymy, antonymy, and hyponymy, like, for example, that a rose is a type of flower, that demonstrates a really sophisticated level of understanding.
Okay, this part is the pivot. The absolute best exam answers don't just list a bunch of theories. They connect them to the real world of the classroom. This is the section where you build that bridge and show the practical side of everything we've just talked about.
So let's just ask that question straight up. How does knowing about lexical chunks and word formation actually help you as a teacher? What's the point?
Well, the answer is actually pretty simple, but it's profound. Lexical competence isn't some fifth skill that you teach separately. It's the bedrock. It's the foundation that all the other skills are built on. I mean, think about it. Even with shaky grammar, a speaker who has the right vocabulary can almost always get their message across, but it almost never works the other way around.
So what are the golden rules for teaching vocabulary? Your exam answer should definitely highlight these 3 principles. First off, context is king. Always present new words in context, not as items on a random list. Second, empower your students. Teach them how to learn vocabulary on their own. And third, you have to remember that seeing a word one time is never enough. It's all about repetition, repetition, repetition to move a word from just being recognized to being actively used.
All right, let's get even more practical. This final section before we wrap up is about what you actually do in the classroom and, just as important, how you measure if it's working. This is where we talk activities and assessment.
Okay, this is a really important distinction you have to make when you're talking about assessment: receptive versus productive vocabulary. Receptive is all the words a student can understand when they see or hear them. Productive is the vocabulary they can actually pull out of their own head and use correctly. So naturally, your assessment methods have to test both. You'd use comprehension tasks for receptive skills and production tasks like writing or speaking for productive skills.
All right, we have covered a lot of ground. Now, let's squeeze it all down into the ultimate revision tool. This is the part you'll want to screenshot in your mind. These are the absolute must-knows for your exam.
Okay, here it is. This is your cheat sheet for the exam. If you remember nothing else, remember these 4 connections. Wilkins, that's the centrality of Lexis. Lewis, the lexical approach in chunks. The CEFR, that's what links Lexis to overall communicative competence. And for assessment, the key phrase is receptive versus productive. Weave these 4 points into your answer, and trust me, you are well on your way to a fantastic score.
So there you have it, your complete blueprint for tackling Lexis on the teaching exam, from the core theory all the way to classroom practice. The final practical question is just for you. Now that you have this framework, what's the first thing you're going to focus on or refine in your own approach to teaching vocabulary? Answering that for yourself is how this knowledge becomes truly yours. Good luck in the exam.